this is going to be lesson number 3 of Music Theory Fundamentals. Lesson number 3. And in this lesson, we're going to be covering major scales. I have a major scale written out right here on the board. And this is already a major scale that you might be familiar with, because this is referring to just the white notes on the piano. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. And so you didn't know it yet, but you've already learned one major scale by learning these notes right here. And so I'll play that very briefly on the piano here. So that is this major scale right here. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C. And there are 12 total major scales that you can have. One scale for each one of these notes. One scale for each of these 12 notes that are found within one octave. So you can have a scale that starts on C. You can have a scale that starts on D flat, D, E flat, E, F, F sharp, G, A flat, A, B flat, B. And those are the 12 different major scales that you can play. And I'll run through those very quickly on the piano here. So we already played through the C major scale. You can also have a scale that starts on D flat. You can have one that starts on D, E flat, E, F, F sharp, G, A flat, A, B flat, B, and that's all 12 different major scales that there are. One for each starting pitch of these 12 notes that are found in this octave right here. So if we go back up to this C major scale found right here, I want to go over the half and whole step relationships between note to note. And this will get us a formula that we can use to construct all 12 of the major scales. So between C and D, do we have a whole step or a half step? C to D is a whole step. C, skipping this note right here, to D. A whole step is the distance of 2 half steps. So from C to D, we have a whole step. From D to E, that's another whole step. From E to F, that's a half step. From F to G, whole step. We skip this pitch right here, so therefore it's a whole step. From G to A, we get another whole step. From A to B, another whole step. And from B to C, we get a half step. So this right here, this whole, half, whole, half. This is the formula that we can use to construct every one of the major scales. Because regardless of what your starting pitch is, if you follow this whole step, half step, whole step, half step formula, you can construct the whole major scale. Now let's keep this formula on the board and let's demonstrate how to construct another one of the major scales. Let's try writing our F major scale. Alright, so we have a major scale that starts on F. Now let's apply this formula to write the whole major scale. F up a whole step is what? It's G. So the next note in our F major scale is the note G. So that takes care of this one in our formula. Go up another whole step, we get A. G to A is another whole step. Therefore, that is the next pitch in our F major scale. Alright, now we need to go up a half step. A half step from A is what? B flat. That's the next note in our major scale. Now we need to go up a whole step. From B flat up a whole step would be the note C. So that's the next note in the major scale. Alright, so we did that whole step there. Now we need to do another whole step. C to D. Now we need to do the next whole step. D to E. Then, last but not least, another half step. So E up another half step. Of course, now we're back to our starting pitch, F. So we started and ended on the note F. So we got whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, and half step. So that is the F major scale. Now, one thing before we continue writing the other of the major scales, I will say this. For each major scale, it's important that you have each of the letters of the musical alphabet. So every letter from A to G, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, they need to all be written in the scale. What do I mean by that? For example, in this scale right here, we called this note a B flat. We didn't put an A sharp in our scale. A sharp would be the same note as a B flat, but you don't want to have A's and A sharps in your scale. So this right here, don't put an A followed by an A sharp. You don't want to have two of the same letter names side by side like that. You want to have each note of the alphabet, of the musical alphabet, accounted for in your scale. So you wouldn't want to have a G followed by a G sharp, a B flat followed by a B natural, a C followed by a C sharp. You would use the enharmonic of those pitches. You would use the enharmonic of A sharp, which is a B flat. That way every letter name is accounted for. If that didn't quite make sense to you, we'll talk about it more when we talk about the next 10 major scales. So we took care of our C major scale and our F major scale. Let's do our D major scale. Now, because we want every letter name accounted for in our scale, regardless of what accidentals I'm going to have to put in my major scale, I need to have a note placed on each line and each space. That way, each letter name is accounted for. So, to write out my scale, before any sharps or flats, I need to have a note on each line and each space, all the way from D to D. So there, you can see I have each line and each space accounted for before I even start worrying about what sharps or flats go in the D major scale. So, going back to our formula, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 and half. Let's see what kind of accidentals we need to put in our D major scale in order to meet this formula right here. So, D to E, do we need to add any sharps to the note E to get a whole step there? No, because D to E is already a whole step. So, that pitch is good to go. E to F, is that a whole step? No, it's not. So, in order to make this F fit our major scale criteria, we need to add a sharp sign to it. We want to call that F sharp instead of G flat. If we called it G flat, then we'd have a G flat followed by a G natural, and we don't want to do that when writing major scales. So we got whole, whole, now we need a half step. F sharp to G, is that a half step? Yes, it is. So that G is good to go. No sharps needed on that note. G to A. Is that a whole step? Yes, it is. A to B. Whole step. B to C. Whole step? No, that's a half step. So in order to make this C work in our scale, we need to add a sharp sign next to it. And remember, we don't want to call that D flat. We want to call it a C sharp, because we don't want to have a D flat followed by a D natural. And so the last step in our scale is a half step. C sharp to D certainly is a half step. So these are the pitches for the D major scale. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, and D. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, and D. That takes care of our D major scale. Let's write out our E major scale. So before we talk about any sharps or flats that we need to add to our scale, we need to put a note on every line and every space from E to E. So here's an E right here, an F, a G, A, B, C, D, and E. So we're doing our E major scale, so E and E, those are already good to go. So we got E taken care of, and this E up here. Alright, now starting at our first part of our formula there, we need to go a whole step above E. What's a whole step above E? F sharp. Right now this is reading as an F natural, so we need to put a sharp sign right there. Alright, F sharp to G. Is that a whole step? Nope. So we need to add a sharp sign to this G to make it a whole step. The next one we need is a half step. G sharp to A. Is that a half step? Yes, it is. So that's taken care of there. That's good to go. Now we need a whole step above A. A to B. Whole step. We're good to go. B to C. Is that another whole step? No, so we need to add a C sharp right here. C sharp to D. Is that another whole step? No, so we need to add a sharp sign to it. C sharp to D sharp. Whole step. D sharp to E. Half step. So this E major scale has the notes E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, and E. So that is our E major scale taken care of. Alright, so let's do our G major scale. G major scale, let's start with a note on every line and every space in between G and G. Alright, G major scale. G up a whole step would be A. Is that an A? Yes, it is. So that note is good. No sharps or flats needed. Our next one is a whole step. So A to B, is that a whole step? Yes, it is. So that pitch doesn't need any sharps or flats added to it. B to C, is that a half step? Yes, it is. So that pitch is good to go. C to D, is that a whole step? Yes. So that pitch is good. D to E, is that a whole step? Yes, it is. So that pitch is also good. E to F, is that a whole step? No, so we need to add a sharp sign to this F. So that takes care of that whole step there. F sharp to G, that finishes out with our half step. F sharp to G is a half step. So the notes of our G major scale are G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G. So that takes care of G major scale. Let's write our A major scale. So we'll start and end on the note A and fill in each line and each space. So our A major scale needs to start and end on A. And our first interval is a whole step. Do we have a whole step from A to B? Yes, we do. So that pitch is good right there. We need a whole step next, B to C. That's not a whole step, so we need to add a sharp sign to this to make that a C sharp. All right, now we need a half step after the C sharp. So C sharp up a half step is D natural. So that pitch is good. Next, we need a whole step. A whole step above D is E. So that pitch is good to go. Now we need a whole step from E. E up a whole step is F sharp. So we need to add a sharp sign to that F right there. Now we need to do one more whole step. F sharp to G is not a whole step, so we need to add a sharp sign to the G. And G sharp to A is our half step. So the notes of the A major scale are A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, and A. So that takes care of our A major scale. Moving on to our B major scale, we need to start and end our scale on the note B. So we'll have B as our starting and ending note, and we need to put a note on each line and each space in between those two notes there. So we got a B, C, D, and E, F, G, A, and B. Alright, so we'll start our scale on B and end on B. Starting from the bottom, we need a whole step above B. B to C is a half step, so we need to add a sharp sign next to this C. Going up another whole step, C sharp to D is a half step, so we need to add a sharp sign to this D. Now we need a half step. D sharp to E is a half step, so that is good to go right there. Now we need a whole step. E to F is a half step, so we need to add a sharp sign to this F to make it a whole step. F sharp to G, we need another whole step, so we need to make that a G sharp instead. G sharp to A, that's a half step, we need another whole step, so we need to add another sharp sign right there. So these are the notes of our B major scale. B, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, and B. That's our B major scale. Now let's take care of the major scales that start on the black keys of the piano. Let's do a scale that starts on D flat. D flat. Now remember, before we draw any flats or sharps, we need to just take care of each line and each space from D to D. In our D flat major scale, we'll have some sort of a D, some sort of an E, some sort of an F, some sort of a G, whether they be flat or sharp, some sort of A, some sort of B, and some sort of D. Alright, so we want to write our D flat major scale. So we'll put a flat sign on this D and this D to make them D flats. Now let's apply our formula now. Whole step above D flat is D flat to E, a whole step. That's actually more than a whole step. So we need to add a flat sign to that E to bring it down to this pitch right here. So that way D flat to E flat is a whole step. So we got D flat followed by an E flat. That's our first whole step. We need another whole step above E flat, which we've got. E flat to F is already a whole step. So that pitch doesn't need any flats next to it. F to G, is that a half step? No, so we need to add a flat sign next to that G to make it a half step. F to G flat. Now we need a whole step. G flat to A, is that a whole step? G flat A? No, in fact that's more than a half step. So we need to flatten that A to make it a whole step. G flat to A flat would be a whole step. Now, moving on in our formula, we need another whole step. A flat to B is bigger than a whole step, so we need to put a flat sign on the B to make it a whole step. So B flat will be our next pitch. B flat to C, is that another whole step? Yes, it is. So we don't need another flat sign next to that pitch. And then, of course, we end it with another half step. C to D flat is a half step. So that is our D flat major scale. D flat, E flat, F, G flat, A flat, B flat, C, and D flat. You may be picking up on this already, but if you have a scale that has any sharp sign in the scale, it doesn't have any flat signs with it. And if you have a scale that has flat signs, it doesn't have any sharp signs with it. So if you're writing a scale and you have flats and sharps in your scale, that means that you wrote the scale wrong. Each scale will only ever use either all flats or all sharps. So moving on to our E flat major scale, let's draw a scale that starts and ends on E flat. E flat major scale, so we need some sort of E, some sort of F, some sort of G, some sort of A, some sort of B, some sort of C, some sort of D, and some sort of E. Let's apply our flat sign to our E's, because we know those need to be E flat. You can't have an E flat major scale without E flats, so that takes care of our E flats there. Our first distance needs to be a distance of a whole step. So E flat up a whole step is F. That pitch doesn't need any flats. Up another whole step, F to G. That's already a whole step, so that pitch is good to go. G to A, is that a half step? No, so we need to add a flat sign to this to make G to A flat. G, A flat, half step. A flat to B, that's not a whole step, so we need to add a flat sign to that B. B flat to C, is that a whole step? We need another whole step. That's a whole step, so that pitch is good to go, no flats needed. We need another whole step now. C to D, that's already a whole step, so we're good to go there. And then, of course, we have D to E flat, a half step at the top. So our E flat major scale has the notes E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, and E flat. Alright, so that takes care of our E flat major scale right there. Moving on, let's do our F sharp major scale. Now we could actually start this scale on F sharp or G flat. They would sound the exact same if you were to play them on the piano. F sharp and G flat are of course the same note, but the F sharp major scale would use sharp signs to indicate the scale. The G flat major scale would use all flat signs to indicate the scale. For the sake of this video, let's just use the F sharp major scale. So we need to start and end on some sort of F. And of course for our F sharp major scale, that is going to have to be a F sharp there. And let's fill in the void here with every line and every space in between those two pitches. We'll need some sort of G, some sort of A, some sort of B, some sort of C, some sort of D, and some sort of E. Our first distance needs to be a whole step. F sharp to G, that's not a whole step, so we need to add a sharp sign next to this G. F sharp to G sharp is a whole step. G sharp to A, is that a whole step? No, so we need a sharp sign next to that A. Now we need a half step. Is A sharp to B a half step? Yes, it is. A sharp to B, that's a half step, so that pitch is good to go. B to C, is that a whole step? Nope, that's a half step, so we need to increase that to a whole step there by adding a sharp sign. C sharp, now we need another whole step. C sharp to D, that's a half step, so we need to increase that size to a whole step by adding a sharp sign to make that a D sharp now. D sharp to E, is that a whole step? No, so we need to add a sharp sign to this E to make it a whole step. Now, if you recall, in one of the past videos, I said that whenever we go to write out our major scales, we'll need to use some enharmonics. This is one example where we have an E sharp written instead of an F. Instead of an F natural, we have an E sharp written because we don't want an F natural followed by an F sharp. We want every line in every space, every letter to be accounted for, so we need to make it an E sharp, not an F natural. So that will be an E sharp there, followed by an F sharp. So our F sharp major scale is F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, and F sharp. And the goal is to be able to get to a point where you can recite the major scales off the top of your head to where you can be like, all right, A major scale, what's my A major scale? And you'll be like, A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A major scale. The goal is to be able to do that with all 12 of your major scales. It'll take some practice and some repetition, possibly of writing this out on staff paper multiple times in a row. But that is certainly the goal, because this will make you fluent in reading any sort of music that is set before you. Learning all 12 of your major scales is really important. So that takes care of our F sharp major scale. Let's move on to our A flat major scale. Our A flat major scale needs to start and end on an A flat, of course. So I'll draw two A flats up here, and let's fill it in. Some sort of B, some sort of C, some sort of D, some sort of E, some sort of F, and some sort of G. Now the reason I'm doing an A flat major scale instead of a G sharp major scale for this example is because if I were writing it as a G sharp major scale, I would actually need to start introducing double sharps. And we want to avoid double sharps and double flats if we can keep from it. That's why I'm going to do an A flat major scale. Going on with our A flat major scale, we need a whole step first. So A flat followed by a B is not a whole step, so we need to add a flat sign to that B to make it a whole step. B flat to C is a whole step, so we're good to go there. C to D, that's not a half step, so we need to flatten that D. D flat to E is bigger than a whole step, so we need to add a flat to decrease that size. Now E flat to F, we need another whole step, which we got. E flat to F is a whole step. F to G is another whole step. And then of course, G to A flat is our half step. So our A flat major scale is A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat, F, G, and A flat. Alright, last but certainly not least, let's do our B flat major scale. B flat major scale, so we need to start and end on B flat. We need some sort of a C, some sort of a D, some sort of an E, some sort of F, some sort of G, and some sort of A. So we start and end on B flat. We need a whole step first. So B flat to C, that's a whole step. C to D, that's already a whole step. D to E, we need a half step, so we need to make that an E flat instead of an E natural. E flat to F, is that a whole step? Yes, it is. F to G, also a whole step. G to A, also a whole step. And then A to B flat, of course, is a half step. So the notes of the B flat major scale are B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, and B flat. And that takes care of all 12 major scales. So we learned that to write a major scale, we need to cover every line and space between the starting and ending pitch and apply our flats or sharps as necessary to fit this formula here. And remember that we won't have F's followed by F sharps. We'll have every letter name accounted for in the scale. So you wouldn't want to have a D followed by a D sharp, because then you'd be missing the E note. So we have D followed by an E flat instead. So we learned how to write out all 12 major scales by applying this whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half formula. And I just to remember this formula, you can just think of whole, whole, half, and then a whole step in the middle, and then whole, whole, half. So you got a whole, whole, half right here, a whole, whole, half right here, and then in the middle, you just have a whole step. So whole, whole, half with a whole step right there in the middle. So use this formula to practice writing out your major scales. And remember, you won't have flats and sharps in the same scale. So if you're starting to write a sharp and a flat in the same scale, that means you haven't used the right enharmonic. Just make sure every letter name is accounted for in your major scales, and that will solve all your problems with having sharps and flats in your same scale. But that will wrap up lesson number 3 on major scales. To get you an idea of what the future lessons are going to be about, we're going to cover minor scales and then move into key signatures and the circle of fifths. The circle of fifths is a really good tool of navigating all of your keys and all of your scales as well. So the circle of fifths can help us with key signatures and with our major and minor scales. But that will cover lesson number 3 on major scales, and these topics will come in the near future.